I'll just sort of introduce like how I came to be working so much in New Orleans. My first introduction to New Orleans when I was 16, and I was totally terrible. I didn't quite get the city. I accidentally showed up in the middle of Mardi Gras on Bourbon Street and was like, what is this? So many years later, Jay actually said, you don't understand. New Orleans is an amazing, wonderful place, and you have to come. And he would just say all the time, every time I would see him, he would say, you have to come here, you have to work here. You need to develop a relationship with this city because I love this city and because I think that you would love it too. And so, you know, I just started traveling here, and then we started to sort of slowly talk about a project. And I think that is important because to talk about the question of process, you know, there's a million ways to answer that question, from like how do you start a drawing to how do you realize something. But I think that, you know, the work that people know of mine, which is a lot of large scale projects that involve a lot of people, it's the kind of situation where people, you know, my name or sort of my personality is like most kind of, you know, to be brief, tied to the project. And there is a way that I have of conceptualizing and realizing things, but I think that the underlying community that all of us are a part of, that there's a large community of artists who are each realizing their own dreams in their own ways and sort of reaching out to each other and banding together and working really hard to make things happen. And I feel like that is kind of like the single most important force in my life and my art making. And so being here with Airlift is I think that's sort of like the really. Oh, actually, can you just loop those slides? You can just you can just put them on a loop. So anyway, so I came from Daytona Beach, Florida. I started painting when I was like 10. So roots as an artist. I started taking painting classes with, you know, those guys like Bob Ross, and it's like Fuzzy Little Bunny, this kind of thing. I lived in this like crazy, like hellion, awesome redneck neighborhood that all of a sudden all the kids just disappeared, and I was just like on this dirt road by myself. And my mom was like, well, maybe we could take you to a painting class because you draw all the time. And so I went to this painting class, and it really like kind of like blew my mind. And I was like with these old ladies. It was all like everyone was like, you know, it was very much like Florida retiree painting class. And here I was like 10. I was like, oh gosh, I didn't know, you know. And they were like, hi honey, what are you doing here? But then they were very embracing, and they taught me how to paint with the fuzzy and the thing. And it I can't tell you how much like being a 10-year-old girl and having people being suddenly like, oh, you paint oil paintings? Oh, this is, you know, and everyone sort of like treating me quite seriously about it. And I think that experience as a child who has just like that little seed of like desire to create. Sorry, I'm getting a million text messages. I'm gonna take my phone. I think is really important. And I know, you know, I think it's true of everyone, and I know that's especially true for young women, that, you know, there's just a lot. Like confidence is kind of like just the sunshine and water that like makes any kind of like idea grow. And so that was like this kind of very funny little moment that I had of being sort of extraordinarily encouraged. And then I was like living in this kind of small town where, you know, pre-internet, so all I had was like my library and a couple of books, and I really got kind of steeped in like sort of classical art making. I was really into, you know, Michelangelo and the sort of all the long history of like Vermeer, Van Gogh, the sort of very classical painting. And having any kind of really contemporary art education didn't happen until I moved to New York. And so it was like this really kind of hard and fast education where I suddenly went from having this like very, very old school kind of classical notion of what art making was to being thrown into all these different ideas about, you know, about what it means to be a creator, and then instantly kind of becoming totally disillusioned with what I perceived of as the sort of contemporary art setting. And so it was like this really fast transition from being like introduced to something and being like, okay, here I am and here this is, and then being like, okay, this isn't for me, and then now back to where I am, which is working in this museum. And so I was in school and I was like studying painting, and I kind of just had a little nervous breakdown about what it meant to make objects which were purely for consumption, and to channel all of your energy and all of your resources and all of your soul and all of your everything into something which felt so sort of easily commodifiable, you know. And so that was like the original seed of the impulse to go outward. And so these slides that you're seeing right now are are my sort of like very early attempts to be like, how do you make something which is a part of its environment? How do you make something which can't be divorced from its context? How do you make something which is a moment and not an object? And you know, graffiti was a huge kind of like wake up for me when I first moved to New York. I would say that the two of the things that really blew my mind that I hadn't any exposure to were graffiti, and then also works of like land-based artists and Gordon Matta Clark, and people who really kind of like just took on major contexts, you know, and like finding out that Revs had written his entire life story one page at a time in every tunnel in the New York City subway system just kind of broke my heart in this way. I was like, that's the most beautiful story. And you know, the train slows down and you come upon the pages, and I just felt that there was this way of making something which was like a love poem to the city, and which was part of the city, and which was sometimes aggressive toward the city as well, that just had an immediacy that felt kind of right to me. And so I was like this little kind of, you know, college kid being like, okay, well, here I am, and I make these drawings, and what, you know, and just wondering like, how do I be who I am and not change who I am, and bring what I have to give, but then also try to just find something new for myself. And so I started working outside. I started printmaking, because printmaking seemed like a language which had kind of a harshness to it, you know, relief printing, that felt like it could interact with city walls, and it felt like that you could still be like running somewhere or biking somewhere and still kind of get a sense of how it fit within the city and caught your eye and things like that. And so I just started making drawings and making portraits and just following my nose. And that was the first time as an artist that I ever had the feeling that I had no idea what I was doing. And I think that was hugely important to me. Like my whole life before that, I was like, oh, now I'm going to paint a Van Gogh, you know, now I'm going to do this, now I'm going to do that. And I had this kind of sense of imitation and learning, but that was the first time that I felt quite lost. And I felt that that was really important. It was like there was the space from myself to where I was going was like very dark, and I was just kind of feeling around inside of it. And I think that was definitely the beginning of the journey to where I am at this moment. And maybe actually these slides could even go a little bit faster. So here we are. Once I got obsessed with the city, I became really obsessed with the city. And so I was like, you know, pasting on walls, and then I was thinking about public spaces and sort of advertising and all the various ways that the city is bought and sold. So the longer I worked in the city, the more I felt like I wanted to sort of open out that process into figuring out not just about how to like put a painting on a wall or sort of like interact with the city in that kind of visual, physical way, but how to really become a part of it, and how to also create artwork that was sort of even further blurred that line between who you were and how you lived and what you made. And so that was kind of a long, you know, first I sort of got together with like a small posse of friends, which again I feel like is the most important kind of step, and just like finding the people that were important to me and that thought alike. And we started a little collective which was all about doing various urban interventions, and then that sort of slowly just like opened outward until I was, you know, making boats and going down the Mississippi River, or like working with Jan Delaney to try and like actually build a house, and Ben, who, hi Ben, Ben and I about a little over a year ago, when the earthquake hit Haiti, we were in the middle of studying architecture, and we had a moment where we were like, you know, let's try and help, and let's try and figure out like what artists can do in this situation. Sort of again that thing of knowing that you are who you are, and you're not trying to exactly change who you are, but you're trying to bring your skills to bear upon a certain situation and like the artistic process.